very pleased to make a brief contribution on the Public Works Committee's report on the proposed infrastructure of the Findon Technical College, which I understand work has now begun. The Technical College, I see it, is effectively a significant upgrade to the facilities at Findon High School, and I'm certain that the Findon High School community is glad of this opportunity, in addition to the $10 million capital works that were in planning and underway to some extent. This is now a $35 million additional project which will provide particularly technical college facilities in the form of buildings that are purpose-built to deliver certain vocational education and training outcomes. Its purpose, if I can sum it up, is to upgrade a school's facilities and to prioritise vocational education and training and vocational outcomes, which are certainly purposes that the opposition has no problem with. The way that the government has talked about the technical college program, both in the election campaign and since, I think is where the rhetoric doesn't quite match up to the reality. Technical education and vocational education are tremendously important, and I think they are understood in the community as being important priorities as well. I think that many in the community think of technical colleges, they think back to a bygone period where indeed some schools existed solely to be technical colleges, and there was certainly a movement away from that approach in the 1970s and 80s and 90s, and I think that we understand that there was certainly a push to make sure that everybody was able to conceive that they could get to a university pathway if they wanted, and in recent years we've been struggling with the legacy of that as we also now try and educate not just students but parents as well, that technical and vocational skilled pathways are tremendously important opportunities. And indeed, one of the priorities for our government when we were in from 2018 to 2022, I worked very closely with the member for Unley, who was the Minister for Skills during that period, was to ensure that students who actually weren't the biggest problem in terms of highlighting the importance of VET, but particularly their parents and the broader community, understood that 8 out of the top 10 pathways in terms of growth sector for jobs were in vocational and technical education. That in many of the ways where there would be the best job opportunities and pay opportunities, those sectors required a skilled qualification rather than a university degree. The idea that we could encourage more young people into learning and earning at the same time, so that if they were in Year 12, for example, they could be completing that Year 12 while at the same time completing the first year of an apprenticeship. That was an important step. The reality around how one is best to deliver vocational education and training, skilled qualifications, to school students, to students of school age, is more complex than the rhetoric would suggest. The rhetoric goes back many years. This first, I think, really came to the political fore in about 2007, give or take a year or two, when Kevin Rudd's government decided that the trade training centres were to be one of the ways forward. Now, these were centres where funds were made available by the federal government to set up improved technical facilities in state and non-government high schools around Australia, and different clusters of schools were encouraged to bid for that federal fund so that they could build some purpose-built technical facilities in their areas. Some of those facilities that were built within a couple of years became obsolete, were no longer connected to the industries, what industry needed. I think it belied a lack of consultation and engagement with local industry on what was needed at the time, and the Education Department has learnt from that experience over the years, no doubt. Some of those facilities still exist and have been repurposed in other ways, but with potentially expensive pieces of kit lying dormant as they have for many years. The state government during the Rann and Wetherill eras had a program called Trade Schools for the Future, which operated with apprenticeship brokers and I think was closed down in 2017. I think that funding was repurposed for other tasks within the Education Department. And certainly in 2018, when the Liberal government was elected, we had a program called initially Flexible Apprenticeships, and then Flexible Apprenticeship and Traineeships, and then it was highlighted to me as the Shadow Minister and then Minister that that had an unfortunate acronym, and ultimately some engagement with the industry sectors highlighted a better name for it, which remains under the new government, as I understand, of the Flexible Industry Pathway Model. And I think the key insight that the Flexible Industry Pathway Model had, and why I think the new government has been good enough to continue that program, was that we want to make sure that, firstly, flexible pathways, they might be an apprenticeship or a traineeship, or in certain sectors another model of a pathway, bespoke for each sector. And they really need to look at the needs of the industry. Having that high school qualification is very important, but actually ensuring that for industry and businesses to engage with the students effectively, the school needed to be designing its program around what that industry needed. Having a one-size-fits-all approach where the school timetable rules supreme and the student might be available to go out and work as part of their apprenticeship or their traineeship for 3 hours a day, 3 hours a week, or potentially 1 day a week on a release to the business, was not something that was going to be of really any benefit to the business, and you certainly wouldn't be able to get the job readiness that a first year or second year apprentice requires by having just that short period of time. So the Flexible Industry Pathway Model firstly designed what does industry need and where are the jobs going to be that will be there for these students when they finish that pathway, so it can be seamless. They continue through their high schooling, they start the pathway in year 11 or 12, they're potentially doing the majority of their week at the business or the industry, or potentially the whole week with just some blocks of time going back to school to continue to complete their required SACE units. And indeed, then they can seamlessly go on to be working in that industry or continuing working in that business as a second, third or fourth year apprentice once they've finished their year 12. And the second insight that the Flexible Industry Pathway Model had, which is tremendously important, was that we want all of our schools in South Australia to be able to offer these pathways. Each one of our public high schools has signed up to one of the 26 flexible industry pathways, or more. Some of them are offering many. I know that the member for Florey, in talking about the programs to be offered at the Findon Technical College, highlighted early childhood education and health and social care. These are two tremendously important areas with job shortages and skill shortages, and we need students and young people to do Certificate 3, Certificate 4s, diplomas in these industries, starting at many schools, of course, with Cert 2s, I imagine, as well. Now, the thing is, there are many high schools around South Australia that are offering these pathways as part of their approach under the flexible industry pathways. And this is good. Many of them were piloted in 2021. Many of them were fully rolled out in 2022. And in the years ahead, I expect schools around South Australia to continue to offer flexible industry pathways in health and social care, in early childhood education. Indeed, I think that dozens of schools, I think 20 may be offering it at the moment. I could be wrong. I'm sure the Minister can correct me if I'm mistaken. But many schools are able to offer these pathways, and they can offer them to students from other high schools in the local area as well. And that's a great outcome. And it will encourage, hopefully, hundreds, if not thousands. There may already be hundreds, potentially, of students undertaking these. But with dozens of schools involved, with all of our public high schools offering different industry pathways, then we can really be put in a great position to meet the skills needs of the future. Now, bringing us back to the specific pathways being offered at Findon High, there will be a $35 million new building for those pathways to be supported in. I think that there's no problem with upgrading the school facilities. What I would hate to see, and the government, and I'm sure the department's got some people working on this, is the buildings being seen as more important than the work that is being done in these buildings, more important than the engagement with business and industry. It's going to be very important as these technical colleges are rolled out at very significant expense that those 5 sites not be seen as the priority area over and above the need for us to give every student at every school in South Australia the opportunity to find the pathway that suits their needs. And so those flexible industry pathways at schools across South Australia, I urge the government to keep as the priority so that students, whether at Findon or any of the other 130-odd public high schools, have access to great quality pathways and skilled qualifications.